All right, ready to begin. Wrist check, the momentum UDT. Let us begin. Hello everyone and welcome to BHT Studios. Today we'll be taking a look at this camera right here, the Leica D-Lux 8. This is the 8th iteration of the D-Lux series. This has actually been around for over 20 years, this D-Lux series. It's a partnership between Panasonic and Leica, and I've loved this series. Some people, they've barely heard about this camera, and I've seen some YouTube reviewers. I think this is probably the first time they've even touched the D-Lux, and so there's a lot of misconceptions about this camera. There's a lot of things that I'd like to kind of go over, a little bit of the history of this camera and how it compares to a camera like the Q3. And really, these two cameras are very different. I think if you have a Q3, you probably, not that you don't want this camera here. I mean, I'll give you reasons why you would want a camera like this. Ultimately, this is a gateway camera for Leica into the Leica ecosystem. It always has been, but at the same time, it has some superpowers that even the Q3 doesn't have. So let's begin this video by talking about the price. This camera is $1595 USD, so it's just under $1,600. So this is a high-end point and shoot, which there aren't too many around. This being one of them, a lot more expensive, but other cameras like the Ricoh GR series that's been around for a long time as well as the X100. But really the D-Lux has been around longer than the X100 and longer than the Q series, because as I mentioned, it goes back more than 20 years to the original D-Lux. I don't even think they even called it the D-Lux 1, but that was a 3 megapixel camera. Again, maybe it was like 2003, so it's been 21 years. But the most significant D-Lux that ever came out for me, and it's the template for all other D-Lux that came after, the sister camera to it was the Panasonic LX3, and I bought that way back in 2008. So I wasn't kidding when I said I have a lot of experience with the D-Lux / LX series of cameras, and the Leica version of it was the D-Lux 4. Now that was a groundbreaking camera in the entire point and shoot ecosystem. If we go back to 2008, point and shoots were still quite popular, lots of options at that time, and the competition to the D-Lux 4 and the LX3 at the time was the Canon G10 and the Nikon P6000, and obviously there were other cameras that were competition to it. But what made the LX3 D-Lux 4 unique was, first of all, it only had 10 megapixels at that time, and the Canon was, I think, almost 15 megapixels, like 14.8, and the Nikon was like 14 megapixels. So it was quite brave for Panasonic and Leica to come up with a 10 megapixel camera, and their reasoning was that megapixel war was a waste of time and that the image quality was kind of horrible at that high megapixel rate, versus on a camera like this, 10 megapixels was more than enough for point and shoot. And something else they did was the other cameras, the Canon had like a 28 to 140 and the Nikon was like a 28 to 112. Well, the D-Lux at the time was equivalent of a 24 to 60. Now, that also seemed weird. Like, why would you get a 24 to 60 versus a 28 to 140? Well, first of all, you go to 24. So you get sort of the beginning of ultra wide. And at that time, point and shoots did not have a 24 mil. So the D-Lux 4 was quite unique in starting at 24. Now, it only went to 60, but the f-stop was f2 to 2.8. which was again quite groundbreaking at the time, where the Canon was like f2.8 to 4.5, but you know, it went to 140, and the Nikon was like f2.7 to 5.9. So f2 to 2.8 was a pretty big deal, and 10 megapixels way back in 2008. So that template of having lower megapixels but better IQ performance, and having a wider as well as not as much of a zoom. So the newer, the D-Lux here is a 3.1 times zoom, so it's a 24 to 75 equivalent zoom. But the new one is, we know, is at f1.7 to f2.8. So that same philosophy, that same principle going right back to 2008 is still, that DNA is still embedded in the most recent D-Lux 8. And then the third thing that hasn't changed since 2008 is using a sensor and having multiple aspect ratios here. So it's actually built into the lens. You can see right here. It's shadowed by the flash. Let's take the flash off here. So you can see it right there. You have 3x2, 16x9, 1x1, and 4x3. Now 4x3 is the micro four thirds, right? Hence 4:3. That is the native aspect ratio. But unlike most cameras that, for instance, 4x3 aspect ratio sensor. So if you shoot 4x3, you'd assume this to be using the entire sensor, but it doesn't. And going all the way back to the Leica, right, all the way back to the D-Lux 4, and I'll put an insert here. It's kind of hard to explain verbally, but in the insert you'll see whatever the aspect ratio of the sensor, Leica Panasonic wanted to maintain the same angle of view, and so it actually takes a cropped version. So even the native aspect ratio 4:3, it doesn't matter. It's cropped in so that even if you shoot at 16:9, you're maintaining the same angle of view. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. Very specifically of like what are the resolutions of your aspect ratios, because it all changes. But the most, so it's a 21 megapixel sensor, but you're only going to get a maximum of close to 17 megapixels because of that unique way of switching aspect ratios in this mode. And I think that's something that I don't even think Leica even talks about anymore, but to me that was quite a unique thing. So when you shoot 6x9, you're actually getting a wider shot. And so again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But going back to the history of the D-Lux series of cameras, back in 2014, the D-Lux Type 109 finally came out and it was upgraded to a micro four thirds sensor. I shot a YouTube video of myself with it in Hong Kong, so I'll put the link down below, but I really enjoyed using that, not only as like a vacation camera, but it took awesome pictures and it still can. I have a buddy of mine who still shoots with the original Type 109, and he loves it. And so that's the time when Leica was using the type, you know, like the Leica M Type 240. And so at the time, the D-Lux Type 109 should have been called the D-Lux 7, but it was called the 109. And so it was the first of the larger sensor D-Lux cameras, and the Panasonic equivalent was called the LX100. And then from the 109, it went to the D-Lux 7, which came out in 2018. And that camera basically bumped up the specs, including the larger 21 megapixel micro four thirds sensor. Not the larger, the higher megapixel count, but with a maximum of 17 megapixels instead of, I think it was like 13 for the Type 109. And so now we have the D-Lux 8. And this camera here is quite unique from all other, like the 8th generation of this D-Lux series. It's quite unique in that, well, one thing is there is no longer a Panasonic equivalent. There is no LX100 Mark III. And my guess is that basically because it's using the same lens and the same sensor, maybe the processor is different, but for someone like Panasonic that is tech-driven cameras, much like Sony, you can't just come up with a refresh and expect people to buy that camera. But with Leica, it's not just about the tech. It's also about the aesthetics, the design, and other things. Like for instance, a camera like the M series, you go from the M9 to the latest M11, your shooting experience is going to be pretty much the same. It's manual focus since 1954, uses the M mount since 1954, using the rangefinder focusing system and framing system since 1954. And so the shooting experience from a film M to a digital M is pretty much going to be the same. Well, how's Leica constantly selling these cameras? Well, again, they're selling experience. And same thing with this D-Lux. They're selling the experience, but the experience is quite a bit enhanced from the previous version. The first thing you'll notice is with the D-Lux 7 compared to the LX100 Mark II, even though it had the Leica design, it still looked a lot like a Panasonic. The button placements, everything was still very much Panasonic-like. And now this camera here, the D-Lux 8, it's definitely a Leica. And so that's why I have the Q here. So this basically is a baby Q. If you look at it, let's just remove the little flash here. And this flash was on the D-Lux 7 as well. Awesome flash. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But as you can see from the top, the layout is very similar. I put a square hood, the little tiny soft shutter release, and that's one of the upgrades, is this actually now has a threaded shutter release like on the Q series here. And so you can add your own soft shutter release to add a little style, but as well as torque. And I think this red one looks mighty fine on this D-Lux 8. And as well, it has the same, that rear dial here on the Q3. You have it on the D-Lux 8, which is, it's tight on the Q3 and it's tight on here, but it also has that extra FN button on the top, which I love. Has the 2 custom function buttons here, which all Leica custom function buttons, if you do a long press, then you can actually change it immediately without having to dig into the menus. And so I like the ability to do that. And you can even see right here with the rear, the D-pad as well as the play in the menu button, exact same position. So this pretty much looks like and works like a mini version of the Q3. And so that is actually a huge upgrade for someone like myself. You can even see like the leatherette. I think the previous LX7 was just like a magnesium alloy metal. This one here matches the leatherette, that kind of that leatherette pattern. You can see that there with the Q3. See that? So it feels more like a Leica versus previously you could tell it was a sister camera to the Panasonic, and so this really feels the most like a Leica camera, going right back to the original D-Lux 1. And another thing is, if you look at the menu system, if you press this here, look at that. Now you have a Leica menu system, the same as if you go to the Q. Look at that. And again, the interface, the UI, Leica makes a big deal about the user interface because, I mean, this is kind of how you interact. It's like an iPhone, right? What's the difference between an iPhone and a Samsung? They look pretty similar, but it's the user interface. How you engage with the device is really important, and Leica now finally has decided to give you the same touch interface. So if you press these buttons here, you do actually be able to touch change the different interface options in these cameras. And so when you're shooting with this, it definitely feels like you are shooting with a Leica camera, and that's a big deal. Another upgrade on here is, again, in the interface, is you are using the more standardized DNG RAW files, which Leica has always done, except in the D-Lux series, without using some proprietary Panasonic RAW file. Now you're getting DNG RAW, which is awesome. So now as you import into Lightroom or whatever you use, you're using that standard RAW file, which in terms, even the thumbnails show up in your MacBook, which is great. As well, the Leica Photos app works awesome on this, and you can even transfer videos and DNG files using that app, or of course you can use the USB Type-C output here. It has the HDMI out. I think it's not necessary unless it had audio in and maybe headphone monitoring, but it's there. But USB-C, when you plug this into your laptop, immediately it just shows up like a hard drive. So even pulling images off of this, it's faster to just use the USB Type-C, as well as you use this. It is a PD connector, so you can actually use this to charge as well, so that's a great upgrade. As well, the LCD's been upgraded to 1.84 million dots, and the 2.36 million dot EVF is now OLED. So it is upgraded, but it's not a huge deal for me, other than maybe if you're punching in to check for sharpness using the LCD screen. But overall, the shooting experience is still very similar to the previous version. It's just, it feels more like a Q than it does a LX/D-Lux series that we've been dealing with the last few years. And so let's now talk about the aspect ratio. And so as I mentioned before, this is not just a crop. So the sensor is 4:3. So you think if you're shooting 6:9, all it does is just crop in on their 4:3, and that's not how it works. Again, I'll put an insert here. It's for the LX3, and maybe for another, maybe I ended up finding one, but you could see that the sensor is this big, 4:3 aspect ratio. Even the 4:3 aspect ratio, it crops in a little bit, and the reason is that as you crop into the various aspect ratios, it maintains the same angle of view. And I think DP Review gives a good sort of a chart to explain how that works. And so thank you, Richard, for, I didn't ask him, but just DP Review showing you the different aspect ratios. And so the largest image you can get from this camera here is in 4:3 aspect ratio mode, but it is not 21 megapixels. It's actually just under 17 megapixels. So it ends up being 4736 by 3552. So that's the horizontal and vertical pixels, and that works out to be a 16.8 megapixels. So the most height vertical pixels you're going to get on this sensor is 3552. Now, if you shoot in 16:9 aspect ratio, you're going to get 2904 vertical pixels, which makes sense, right? It's a bit squashed. But for the width, you're going to get 5152. So the 4x3 was 4736, right? So you're actually getting more pixels, not only more pixels horizontally, but you're actually getting a wider image. And I'll put an insert here. I just did it in my studio, so the pictures aren't that great, but you can see when you shoot 16:9, there's like a little vase and a chair. You get more in the image on the edge, but with 4x3, you actually get more height. You get more on the top and the bottom. Now, for me personally, I like 3x2 and 16:9 aspect ratio. I like getting more in the image. So if you're shooting with the D-Lux series, and this again goes right back to the LX3 and the D-Lux 4, if you want more width in your image, more field, like a wider field of view, and that's different from angle of view, more wider field of view, you're gonna shoot in 16:9. If you want more height in your image, you either shoot square, which I don't know why anyone would shoot square 1x1, or you shoot 4x3. And the decision to shoot which aspect ratio is more important in this camera than any other camera because it actually affects your RAW file. If you shoot in 16:9, your RAW file is going to be 16:9. Unlike most cameras, if the native aspect ratio is 3x2 or 4x3, as you're changing your JPEG aspect ratio, you're just affecting the JPEG, right? You're not affecting the actual RAW. Well, this one, it affects the RAW file. And so beware when you are switching between these aspect ratio, it does affect your RAW file. And so you want the most width, the most horizontal pixels, you shoot 16:9 and you will get a native 5152 by 2904, which works out to be a 15 megapixel image. If you want the most overall resolution, but you're not getting as wide of an image, then you're going to shoot in 4x3 aspect ratio, which works to be 16.8 megapixels or just under 17 at 4736 by 3552. And the great compromise is really going to be shooting at the 3x2 aspect ratio, which works out to be a 16.2 megapixels, which is something I think most of us are used to, which works out to be a 4928 by 3288 pixels. Alright, so a lot of you guys know I actually got this camera from Leica Germany when I was in Germany on my way to Italy to teach the field school. So I've had this camera for about a month. So I have really good experience. I'm going to shoot a different video with images. I mean, I'll slip one in here now, but I love the images. Great image quality, and being able to punch in and zoom optically is fantastic. And I even did a comparison against the Leica M11P with the 35 Apo, and then shooting the same scene, punched in with the 35mm on the M11P, and then this one here shooting from the exact same spot and then optically zooming out, you actually get the same image quality, same megapixel count, but with the 35 on the M11P. But this is a great camera. So let's just, so as I said, I'm going to shoot a different video where I'm going to share lots of photos and a lot of shooting experience with this camera that I had while I was shooting in Italy as well as in Germany. But in this video, it's more of a first impression type pros and cons. So pros I have listed here is the compact size and weight. Just having this around your neck, you almost forget that you have this camera. Now, a lot of people might like wrist straps. I like neck straps because once I have this on my neck, I could just forget that I have this with me. And this is the Wotancraft parachuter strap. Again, I like the red dot here, the square hood soft shutter release with the red dot here and this red paracord and this leather strap. I think it just matches really nicely. So small and compact, magnesium alloy build. It has that grippy leatherette that's the same on the Q3. So it just feels really good in the hand. But at the same time, don't expect the same build quality of this as on the Q series. I mean, this is still more of a tank-like camera. It's weather sealed. This is not weather sealed. And so build quality is still going to be different. Operation is still going to be different. But overall, the build quality of this is, I think, better than the previous D-Lux 7. And as I mentioned before, this is the most Leica-centric, the most Leica-like D-Lux ever, and that includes the fact that there is no Panasonic version of this. And so obviously they're still partnering with Panasonic. Panasonic builds this camera for Leica to Leica specs. You can see that the button layout matches the Q series, and I just love the long press buttons here for your custom function, and it just pretty much shoots like the the Q3 minus the articulating screen, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on the cons slash things I would like to see improve. The threaded shutter release is awesome, so you can modify this and shoot and put your favorite soft shutter release on here. Get a little bit more torque. I love the included flash, and I love the fact that the on and off switch is right here. And because of that, you don't need to dig into the menus to turn flash on or flash off. You basically just, if you don't want the flash to work, you just turn it off like that. And then when you want to use fill flash, you just turn on like this. And so I think having that on and off switch, and most of the time when I'm walking around, I just leave the flash on because the previous LX D-Lux series used to have a built-in flash over here. But of course, there's an EVF now, so you can't put a flash here or even a pop-up flash. And so I think this is a great compromise. As you can see, where else would you put a flash? And so having this clip-on is the best solution. And this is one of the best features is the fact that this is a leaf shutter, so you can flash sync right up to 1/4000th of a second. Daylight flash at low power. Same thing goes for the Ricoh GR and the Fujifilm X100 series. Leaf shutter with flash, high-speed flash sync, daylight fill. That's the superpower of a camera like this. And with this collapsible barrel lens design, so you can see it here. Let's just do a speed test. So this is the on and off button. Press, that's on. So this is at 24. It sticks out quite a bit, but the advantage of this is that when it's off, it does collapse down quite small, right? It's just that when you're shooting, it sticks out quite a bit. And you can also see the speed times of on and off. It's not bad. Opening is really fast. Closing is a little bit slower, as you see that. And one way to speed it up is to turn off Bluetooth. That really slows down the off portion because I think it's looking for the camera. So turn that off, and that's kind of the on and off speed. The 24 to 75 equivalent f1.7, f2.8 with optical image stabilization. You can kind of see it. It kind of shakes. You can see that floating lens element, but as soon as you turn it on, there you go, right? Magnets keep it in place. And so this lens has been awesome. It was awesome even back in 2008 with the LX3 and the D-Lux 4. But this is just a continuation. Just like the Ricoh GR series, I've always loved the lenses on the Ricoh GRs. This is just as good, and it's a zoom, and it's fast. And that's where I really like this lens with optical image stabilization. So at times when I couldn't use my M11 because it's not stabilized, this made a lot of sense. And I can punch in with the optical zoom and get great image quality. And as well, things that maybe people won't think about, but there is an improved video feature. I think this is good enough for B-roll. It's a H.264 420 8-bit, so it's not like this 8K here, and it's not 10-bit, but for video B-roll, the previous version was only MP4, and so H.264 420 is a upgrade, and as I mentioned before, DNG RAW is awesome. Having the OLED EVF and an improved LCD screen is also great, and then the USB-C, not only for charging, so even when you're walking around and your battery's dying, PD charging, you can start charging it, but as well as the fact that it just plug it into your laptop and it just sees it as a hard drive, and you can just pull the images straight off or use a Leica Photos app to be able to play with your images while you're out and about and then be able to share it to socials right away. Now, in terms of cons, I'm broken up into two. I say cons slash improve. The improve part is they could probably improve it in firmware. And so the other part will be more of a hardware upgrade, and that can't happen until the D-Lux 9. And so in terms of improvements, I would love to see a step zoom. So this one here, as you turn on, so it starts off at 24, and as you're zooming, it shows you what zoom you're at, right? So you can see there. So if I want to go from 24 to 28, it's, you have to fiddle with it. And if I want to shoot at 35, 33, 36, back up to 35, now I'm at 35. I would love to just go step from 24, 28, 35. I love 40, so 40, 50, 60, and then 75. I don't want to hit 37 or hit 39. I don't think those in-between focal lengths are important. Just like their trialmerate lenses that they make from the M mount, I wanted to hit those specific focal lengths so that, if I want to just shoot at 35 equivalent, I'd love for just to jump to 35. And that's the second improvement I'd love to see is be able to auto zoom to a preset focal length that you prefer. So imagine with this, you don't like to shoot at 24. maybe you prefer to shoot at 35 most of the time, I'd love to see in the menus to actually say, when you turn the camera on, what is the default focal length you want this to go to? And I think you could do that in firmware, and then say 35. When I turn it on, I want it to always be at 35. And another feature you can have is actually remember what the last focal length you were at. So if you were at 35 and then either went to sleep mode or you turn it off and then you turn it back on again, I wanted to remember what the last focal length you were at, or turn that off and say always reset at 24. But I think that can be done in firmware, and I think that would make a huge difference in the speed in which you shoot, as well as just kind of, because this is a zoom, and I think a lot of Leica shooters are prime shooters, it'd be nice to pick. I would pick 24 myself personally. I love 28, but if I can go 24, I would prefer 24. So I think that would be a great improvement. And as well as that, when you're not zooming, you can't see the focal length. See, there's a zoom there. See how it just disappears? Now I don't know what focal length I'm at until I just kind of touch that zoom toggle again. Now I can see that it just disappears there, and that goes away. So I would love to always see what focal length I'm at when the camera is turned on. Another feature I'd love to see is that when the camera is turned off like this, sometimes I'm in a cafe and I just want to see the photos I've taken. I don't want to turn the camera on, because if you turn the camera on, bada bing, the lens telescopes out. I would love to be able to just long press the play button, and a lot of point and shoots do that, the Ricoh GRs do. Long press the play button, and then the images, so it's only in play mode. You can look at your photos, you can transfer it using the app, and then the lens is actually collapsed, right? And then if you have pressed the shutter button, then the lens will pop out. Again, I think that's something that can be done in firmware. Another thing is the D-pad. The previous D-Lux 7 actually had 4 FN positions. It wasn't FN, I think it was set to like macro, like timer, whatever. It'd be kind of cool. So right now the D-pad, the default is basically use it as a 4-way toggle for your focus positions. I think it'd be cool if there was an option, if people like to access a lot of custom functions, is to change this from D-pad to 4 more FN buttons, if that's something that you want to do, just as an option. Webcam mode, it'd be cool if you could use the USB-C out and have this in a webcam mode, so that if you are traveling and you want like a better quality camera for doing your Zoom calls or whatever, it'd be nice if this had a webcam mode. And finally, if someone wanted to use this as a video camera, as a vlogging, talking head camera, is it possible to convert the USB-C into an audio input? If you can, that'd be great. If not, then it'll go under the wish list for hardware upgrade. And so let's go into that right now. Number one is, I think, obviously an articulating screen. That's something that people would really enjoy. Now, I understand why it doesn't have one, because again, this was just, it's a refresh, but it wasn't a complete overhaul of the previous D-Lux 7. And so because of that, there's no articulating screen. The Q3, having it is transformative. When I was in Italy, Leica actually sent me 5 Q3s to loan to the students. And one of the things I heard from almost all the students is, because a lot of them are like iPhone shooters. And so they're used to shooting with the screen, but they're not used to having the screen articulate. And so articulating screen on the Q3 is awesome. And I think it would be great on the D-Lux 9 to have an articulating screen. That would be a big step for this camera. Another thing is I don't like this on and off button here. It'd be cool. So this is the wide and then the tele toggle. Imagine there was one more toggle that actually was on off. So imagine going all the way left and then click, it turns off, and then click to turn on, and then it goes to wide or telephoto here. So I think that would be kind of a cool option. I'm not sure if it's even possible with this type of switch here. And another option here is I actually do have this older Fujifilm X30. I think this is a great camera. It uses a smaller 2/3 inch sensor, articulating screen. This came out about I think 2014, 2015. Great camera, but notice here, to turn this camera on and off is actually, this isn't off. Boom, now it's 28 mil, and you actually have a manual zoom. Isn't that cool? Manual zoom, and you still have this rear dial here. I think you can custom function to focus, or maybe even aperture, I think. And so imagine having a mechanical off and then this turns the camera on, and then you have a manual zoom. So I think something like that with this would be great. Imagine being able to turn it off, and then boom, you turn it on, and you have a manual zooming lens. I'm not even sure that's even possible, or if Panasonic has the engineering prowess to do it, but imagine the D-Lux 9 in partnership with Fujifilm and actually just passing this on to Fujifilm and say, hey, make a D-Lux 9, but use, like an X30 chassis and put a micro four thirds sensor, articulating screen, manual zoom. I think it would be so cool. But we're talking 3, 4, 5 years into the future. But something that would be quite a bit simpler to do would be the sensor in here. So we know with the micro four thirds sensor, there is a 20 megapixel stack backside illuminated sensor that's in the OM series for high throughput. You could do video. So if they put that higher throughput stack sensor, so the megapixel won't change, but what will change is, for instance, video. You could probably do an open gate video with a camera like this and have higher video specs like H.265 422 and faster burst speeds and just better overall image quality if they decided to put that stack sensor. Or conversely, if they want more megapixels, there is a 25 megapixel backside illuminated CMOS sensor that's in like the Panasonic GH7, and that's 25 megapixels, a CMOS sensor. So if you want to go higher resolution, then put that sensor. So I think 17 is good enough, shooting at 4x3, 16x9, now we're getting down to 15 megapixels, still good enough. But if you get up to 25, I think this will be kind of a great travel all-in-one camera. And finally, the thing I was telling you about how this actually changes the RAW file and it changes the aspect ratio. It actually changes the RAW file and how the sensor is being utilized. So it never uses the full sensor. So 21 megapixel sensor, you can only get up to a 17 megapixel image. I don't even know if this is even possible in firmware to do it, but in the next generation, if they can't do it in firmware, but it'll have to be a hardware thing, I would love to just forget that maintaining the angle of view, because even Leica's not even using it as a selling point, but just use the full 4/3 sensor. So this would actually be a 21 megapixel image, and then so it's 4x3, 21 megapixels. And if you shoot 16x9, then of course it's cropping, and then the raw file will still maintain the entire, you want to call it open gate, but the entire surface area of the sensor. And so shooting 16x9 JPEG, but your raw file will still be 4x3 like most other manufacturers. And then you could still decide if you want to, then you could shift around the crop a little bit if you wanted to, or just use the full-size sensors. I think that would be a good thing, because I don't think it's really something that people think about much. But again, if you want to shoot wider, 16x9, you want to get the most megapixels, shoot 4x3, but it is a narrower field of view. And finally, for upgrades, hardware upgrades, is to be able to put a microphone input in here. So you could use this for vlogging, talking head, whatever. You could actually create this use this as a B cam. And like the X100 series, because this camera's been around for so long, the I/O is on the wrong side. It should be on this side, right? So it'd be nice to see this moved over to this side. I know that's a huge architectural shift, but if you can have the USB-C, HDMI, and and microphone input on the left side, I think that would be great. And if that's not possible, then create a module here where you can put a module like the Panasonic has it, where you can actually put different I/O using the hot shoe. So you could put microphones, headphones, even add hard drives, stuff like that, using that outer, use this as a wireless transmitter. That's another possibility. But for a camera like a D-Lux, they probably won't do it, because this really is kind of like a vacation type camera. And so that's my first impressions. Like I said, I had this camera for a month, and so I have a lot of thoughts on the actual shooting experience, but I'm gonna shoot a different video. If I've already shot it, I'll put the link down below. But I shot with this in Germany, I shot with this in Italy, and had a great time shooting with it. I have lots of cool pictures to share with you. The camera is not for everyone. I think if you are a current Leica shooter with an M, an SL, and a Q3, as long as you understand this is a consumer level point and shoot that can take really great photographs, but it's not going to be equal to a Q3 or an M11 or an SL in most situations. In some situations, because of the optical zoom, obviously you can do some things where this thing here has to punch in digitally. Well, this one punches in optically, and you're going to get actually similar megapixels when you're shooting. So I think with this one here, because it is a 28, if you do a 75 mil equivalent crop, you're actually going to get higher megapixel count on this, depending on what aspect ratio, especially if shooting at 4:3, you're going to get actual higher megapixel. But we're going to talk about that with my shooting experience video. And so thank you so much, Leica, for sending this to me. My first impressions is I've always loved these cameras since 2008, since I had the LX3 equivalent of the D-Lux 4. Love the D-Lux Type 109. I shot with that in Hong Kong. Love the D-Lux 7. I never had it for very long, but enjoyed the image quality. And now the D-Lux 8, because it matches the Q so well, I think if you are a Leica shooter, or even if you're not, and this is your first Leica camera, and then eventually you buy up into the Q3, the way you shoot with this is going to be identical with the way you shoot with this camera here. And that's something you didn't get with the other D-Lux series cameras. But great sensor, great lens. We talked about the upgrades I would love to see. But for now, this is a great camera. Oh, actually, you know what? Before I even continue on, one thing. Because this just uses a lens cap like this, they do give you that little string, and there's a little hole here so that it'll just sort of dangle off, and I don't like things dangling. So when I was out and about, you just remove this little ring here. You get this auto lens cap, and it is Leica branded. Now you clip this on here. When you turn it on, see that? This kind of moves out of the way. It looks a little weird, but when you turn the camera off and you're not shooting with it, see that? It just auto closes. So I think this is pretty convenient if you're out and about and you're always shooting. Now, this is not weather sealed. The camera is not weather sealed, but it is nice that you don't have to worry about losing your lens cap when you have this on. So I would highly recommend, if you do get the D-Lux 8, maybe it's not something you would use all the time, but if you're going to shoot all day, I think clip this on. And if you're not going to shoot all day, or you just aesthetically just want it to look a little bit nicer, you're not worried about dust or anything, then just use a lens cap and shoot like this. And so again, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon, and happy shooting.